And we're back for another episode of Startup Hustle, a podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. If you want to start, own, or build a business, then you're in the right place. We bring you the real truth about what it's like to take something from concept to launch. From growth, innovation, experience, failing, or winning big, we've got you covered. So let's get down to business with another episode of Startup Hustle, brought to you by Fullscale.io. And we're back. Another episode of Startup Hustle. Matt DeCoursey here to have another meaningful conversation meant to help your business grow. Now, on that exact topic, AI, machine learning, smart computers, things that do stuff automatically and tell us how to live our lives or run our business. We hear a lot about them. Now, before we get into that subject, I do need to let you know that today's episode of Startup Hustle is sponsored by Fullscale.io, helping you build a software team quickly and affordably. Now, I mentioned AI, and what is that and what does it do? More specifically, how can I use it to help my business grow? So in order to answer these timeless and complex questions, with me today, I have Lomit Patel. He is the vice president of a company called IMVU. They have a whole lot of users and do a whole lot of cool stuff, but he's also the author of Lean AI, a best-selling book you can find on Amazon. Now, you know I like it when you're interactive, so scroll on down to the show notes and click the lomitpatel.com link so you can see more about his stuff and some of his content while we get started. Lomit, welcome to Startup Hustle.
I'm so excited to be here, Matt. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. We've got some complex stuff to talk about. Now, before we get too far into that, you want to give us a little bit of your backstory?
Yeah, my backstory is I grew up in England. I came over to the US primarily right at the early time when a lot of the .com thing was starting to take off in the late 90s. And, I went to business school in St. Louis, spent some time in Chicago, but ultimately, been out here in the San Francisco Bay Area because I've always loved working with startups. And my role primarily is to work and join startups really early. And I'm usually known as I'm usually like the first hire who's responsible for helping to drive growth. So that's everything around how do we acquire customers, how do we retain customers, and most importantly, how do we monetize and figure out the right business model so that we can continue to build a long-term profitable business. So it's been a lot of fun. I've worked at a number of different startups. Some have gone on to being acquired, and one ended up going IPO. So I've kind of seen a couple of different facets of how that crazy journey can go with startup life.
Yeah, and you're definitely doing it with the company you're a VP at IMVU. I'm finding information that says you have 4 million monthly users. That's a lot. So now, coupled with that and your own experience, when it comes to AI and your book, Lean AI, while that book is titled and seems to be centric around ways that the venture capital world can do a better job of picking winners, that has a lot of carryover into growing businesses, in your opinion, as well, right?
That's right. Yeah, just to give people kind of the background on the book. So I know a lot of people have heard of the book called Lean Startup. It was really popular. That was written by Eric Ries. So Eric Ries is actually a co-founder at MVU, where I'm working right now. And and one of the reasons for me writing this book was because Eric had encouraged me, when I told him about the idea, because he saw a lot of the things that we've been doing in the last 4 years at MView. I mean, a big part of that growth really came from how we were able to leverage data as becoming our superpower for growth. And, the best way to do that in this day and age is to leverage AI, because AI enables you to kind of take your data and surface insights really quickly so that you can really pivot and figure out which direction you want to go as a business. And just the way that the lean startup helped sort of revolutionize the way startups ended up sort of creating products with real time feedback to iterate products. I feel lean AI is a similar approach that, at least from my conversations, and I speak a lot at conferences. I know a lot of venture capitalists have been really interested in this too, because ultimately investing in startups is a high risk. Right, the failure rate is over 95%. So the big challenge with any startup is not only creating the right product or service. That's kind of like the ticket to get into the game. But once you have the product, the next biggest thing is really figure out who are the right customers to acquire, and how do you drive revenue. And that's where lean AI really comes in, because a big focus of lean AI is around focusing on the use cases around what are the right customers you need to attract into the business? What is the right personal, because it's all around personalization nowadays with so much data. What's the right personalized experience you want to create within the product that's going to continue to keep those users engaged? And ultimately identifying what's the right business model to leverage to build that profitable business. And that could be a factor of whether you want to build a subscription business, or you want to build an e-commerce business, or you want to build a business that's more dependent on ad revenue. But based on which direction you end up going, there's a lot of things that you need to make decisions on pretty quickly based on what users are doing or not doing. And that's where AI really comes in, because it kind of helps increase that velocity of learning at a much faster rate than if you were trying to do that ordinarily by just having a lot of humans, trying to crunch numbers and then sort of bring up these insights. And by the time you generally act on it, it's usually a little bit too late, because you've kind of missed that opportunity to really act on it at the right time and given the user's life cycle with the product.
So there, when it comes to AI, machine learning, and a lot of that stuff, the thing that, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but I've learned a couple things along the way, largely through talking to folks like you and some general experimentation myself, is as humans we're flawed, and the fact that we harbor opinions, and some of those opinions aren't really necessarily data driven; they're biased by our own thoughts. Now, one of the things that you talk about in your book is, and it's pretty well known up to this point, that when it comes to VC investment and other stuff, sometimes that's done on that good old database of gut feeling that we have all developed. And that's case in point, my example of making decisions based on our own biases. Now, that said, as I've gotten older, I've learned to trust my gut a little bit. So how does AI bridge that gap? Because there's data and then there's reality, and they don't always run in parallel.
Yeah, that's such a good question. The reality is, when it comes to investing in businesses, a good part of that is based on relationships, right? Getting to the right person that's going to connect you to getting access to funding your business. But where AI really comes into place, and where it reduces the risks for a lot of venture capitalists is that, when you have a gut instinct, for example, hey, this could be a good business or this might not be a good business, at that stage, it's just a hypothesis, right? You don't really know for sure if it really is or not. But if you apply lean AI into a business model, you'll be able to run through all these limitless scenarios pretty quickly to really figure out, is that business really going to be viable at the end? Because it's going to start getting your real customer data, because it's going to start helping you to spend your money efficiently to attract the right customers who you feel is the right customer for the business, and you'll know pretty quickly, is that really the right customer or not? And if it's not, it will be able to help you pivot towards who is the right customer for the business. What is the right value proposition? Because as most of us know who've been through startups, generally what you start with isn't necessarily where you end with when it comes to being successful. But the difference is really trying to figure out when you need to make those pivots along the way, right? Uh, and and that's where lean AI ultimately doesn't put the pressure on the VC to say, hey, I bet you know you know my reputation that this is going to be successful. It's like, hey, this is one of many that I think has potential, but let's put it through through lean AI, and let's figure out pretty quickly if this actually is going to become a viable business or not. Because ultimately, if it is or if it isn't, it's going to save the VC's time and money. Pretty, and both those are the most valuable resources at the end, right? Because you don't want to end up putting more money behind something that isn't going to work out in the end.
So let's simplify this a little bit for those that might feel that we're in over their head a little bit, and maybe I'm in over mine, because maybe I kind of want to know too. What are a few things that Lean AI would look at with your business, like more specifically? Like, is it based on the total size of a market? Is it based on the amount of money that exists within that industry, competition? Like, what are some of the core pillars? That I know there's a zillion different things, but where are the few foundational elements that all of this starts?
Yeah, generally, when you come up with a business, you expect the founder to do a lot of that research around what's the total addressable market, what's the competition, and ultimately, when you create a product, it's like, how is this better or different than whatever is already out there? Where lean AI really comes in is once you have the product or service, then it's a question of trying to validate, is this product or service really have the ability to scale and become a big business or not? And so the big focus there is around the entire customer journey, and it's around trying to identify who's the right customers that you should be attracting for this product. What's the right, and as paid user acquisition is a big part of where a lot of the money goes for a lot of early startups to try and create traction for the business. That's where lean AI can bring a lot of efficiency, because ultimately, if you have a good hypothesis on who the customers and you start getting that data coming in, it will be able to take that data and be able to build the right audiences based off on who are your best lifetime value customers, and be able to do that at scale across all the different paid channels potentially where you would want to spend your money. And instead of being like dependent on any one channel, it's kind of like managing a portfolio of stocks where you are basically investing based on where you're getting your best return. And so with lean AI, instead of having a bigger team, because generally it takes a lot of people to try and optimize and manage all of these campaigns, this machine has the ability to do all of that work. So you can literally get started with a really small team of maybe a couple of people, and the machine's orchestrating all of these campaigns. It's identifying the right customers. It's running all of these creative tests to identify what's the right message to get people to take the action you want. And then once you get people to take an action and coming in or buying your product, it's testing a number of different like scenarios around what's the most optimal onboarding experience to get people more engaged with the product. And as part of that, the onboarding and the engagement, it's identifying what are the right behaviors and habits you want to create in the product that not only get people engaged but continue to keep them continue to stick around and use a product, and to ultimately turn into evangelists so that they start helping spread word of mouth. And then it also identifies what's the right way you're going to monetize those users, whether it's through testing different pricing options, discounting options, or testing whether you want to offer the product for free or and try to monetize on the advertising side. So it's all of these like limitless hypotheses that generally VCs and founders have, but you can kind of put it in, and instead of trying to cherry pick what's going to be the right one, you can just put all of those into the machine, and the machine will kind of run through these different scenarios using real customer data. and be able to validate what's going to potentially has works or what isn't going to work. And so then ultimately it enables you to continue to focus more on the things that will work and shelve the ideas that potentially didn't have a lot of legs to scale and continue to build a business.
So one of the things I say a lot is saving money is making money. And I as you were mentioning stuff, I only have two words written down on my notes so far: founder error. And that's a real thing. So you talk about, so as founders, especially in the earliest stage, we begin to make assumptions based on a number of different things. I'll use a real life example that just occurred recently. So Fullscale, and today's episode of Startup Hustle is brought to you by Fullscale.io. But Fullscale is the company that I own, and we own a couple other things under that umbrella, one of which is gigabook.com. You used it to make an appointment to be on the podcast. Now, we had to, because we aren't using AI based stuff, we had to literally, so Gigabook is a appointment booking. It also sends text messages and different stuff. We had to go through a somewhat arduous manual process to evaluate our own users, because I had the gut feeling that we were losing money on several of our users, basically based on specific costs like text messaging and different stuff. So we had to go through and figure all that shit out manually, and it was not fast. Some other things that are, still that we're still doing manually is just simple calculations and computations about the industries that we serve, because there's hundreds of businesses that are using Gigabook to manage their business, but we don't classify or clarify at any point what industry they're in. Because it's totally customizable. That'd be like it's really broad. So in your model, the AI would tell us, hey, look, there's 10% of your users, you're actually paying money to have these people as users. Like, we actually found a gym in New Zealand that costs us $100 a month as a client, because they're sending so many text messages. And then they're international and different stuff. So are those kind of the examples that lean AI would help fix? Because it was rather time consuming. And honestly, I'm hoping it's guaranteed to be inexact, because like I said, we're not being that analytical.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said is a really good example of where lean AI could really help, because what it would do, it would expedite that learning curve for you at the end of the day. Yeah, and then best way to think of lean AI is ultimately, what's the outcome that you're trying to get to, right? As long as it has a clear definition of what success is. And generally for businesses, when it comes to growth, the success is the cost to acquire a customer and what's your return on investment. And so if those are kind of the outcomes you want to optimize towards, instead of like trying to put so much pressure on yourself to really come up with, hey, what are the things we want to focus on, right? Because focus is the big challenge with any startup. It's like where do you pivot your resources at any given time? And so if you have some hypothesis, hey, this could be the ideal customer, maybe we should be, doing this with a product or whatever, you can literally turn the machine on and run through real customer data to really identify, like, are you getting to those outcomes at the end of the day? Because whether you want to do an upsell bundle or you want to change prices, the only reason you're doing that is because you're trying to get to some outcome at the end. And if it's not influencing the outcome, then it doesn't really matter if you're doing that. It's a wasted effort, because I don't know how much engineering time goes into like creating these pricing bundles or adding different features into a product. But the reality is that there's always a cost, right? And is that cost, instead of going too far into investing into these different things which may not really move the needle for the business, it's better to know pretty quickly with some early signals, because that's where the AI comes in. It ultimately is predicting, based on what it's getting, that is it going to get you closer or further away from your definition of success. And if it's getting you closer, then let's continue to do more of this. If it's not, then let's pivot away from this and focus on something else.
So I have a question here. You keep referring to the machine
Yeah.
or the program. Is that something you've already built, or is in your book, does this begin to tell me how to build it for myself?
Yeah, so in the book, it really tells you how to build it for yourself, or how you can actually leverage it by just putting a couple of different platforms that already exist out there together. The great thing now versus before is that there's a lot of like software as a service solutions that exist. It's just a question of trying to figure out, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. What's the right puzzles? What are the right pieces to put together? And for the most part, one part of that puzzle is your attribution and measurement data. Because wherever you're spending money to acquire customers, you want to be able to measure whether it's working or not. So you have that data. The other part of that is where you house a lot of your customer data. And if you have a product or service, ultimately you have a CRM database where you have a lot of your customer data. And generally, most of these kind of live in silos. But the great thing is now you can actually integrate all of this into a customer data platform, because everything kind of lives in the cloud. So if you have all of this coming into one place, then you've got the foundation for 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 where AI can kind of be layered on top of. And the question is that AI, where does that come from? You know, you could either try to build this, but my recommendation is not to build this, because ultimately it's a moving target as far as the technology continues to get better, right? And it's so hard to continue to retain that type of talent to keep working on the product, right, to make it better. And
That's
so,
what I was gonna say.
yeah,
As someone that sells tech services, like
yeah,
the idea that you're gonna, I mean, unless you are a big box shop and you
yeah,
have a big budget,
yeah,
you need to be buying this, not building it. Now, yeah, and I mentioned before we hit record, like
yeah,
there are some basic non AI type things that some businesses can do. You can, like, most programmers can write sufficient algorithms and some other stuff that, and I mentioned we do that at Full Scale
yeah,
because we want to know who's posting for jobs, because
yeah,
those are companies that we might want to contact. But the thing is right now there are over despite COVID-19, there are still 400,000 open tech jobs in the United States. So it's like, you look at that, and if you had all those listings and if they were current, how do you, like, who are you going to call first? So like, we just did some simple things. Now, one of the things that you mentioned earlier is you talk about having some idea about like what's a win for you, or like what do you,
yeah,
like what do you believe is good? Because I think people with a lot of AI stuff, while it will figure it'll but AI doesn't, you don't just, oh, let me go down to the store, I got some AI, I sprinkled it on everything I own, and now it's smarter. Like, if we had to do a quick couple minutes on AI for dummies, like, like, you still have to know what you want it to accomplish or what you're trying to reach. Am I correct?
yeah, absolutely correct. AI isn't going to be effective unless you really have a clear definition of what outcome you're trying to get to. Because the simplest way of thinking of AI is it's a way to try and get how can you get a machine to think as smart as a human, or even smarter ultimately. And where AI is able to outperform any human is when it comes to large data sets, right? And the truth is, there's a lot of data that's out there, and if you give it a gazillion gigabytes of data, it's going to be able to process that. But ultimately, it can only process that if it knows what it's looking for, right? So it's got to know what that outcome is that you're ultimately trying to get to. So then it can try and figure out patterns within the data to see, what gets to that outcome. An example of what you were talking about with all these job lists is ultimately, you know, another example is quality of customers. Like for us, how we use AI is to try and identify who are our best lifetime value customers. But ultimately, that there's a good, better, and best type of customer, or good, better, best prospect when it comes to jobs or whatever. But ultimately, the machine is going to be able to identify and score different different users based on what data is telling them, and then bucket them into potential segments. So then you really build these segments, because targeting the right user is really important. Because if you, or else you're just kind of doing a shotgun approach to try and hope that you're going to hit the right user. But once you target the right user, then the second challenge is, are you saying the right thing to that user to resonate with them? That's another piece where AI, it can really help, because then it sort of processes through all of these different messages that are out there to really figure out what's the right message for these types of users that will resonate the most, so that it will get them to take the desired action that you want them to take.
So to back this downstream a little bit, so much of what we're talking about right now, you talk about acquiring users and whatever, is related to marketing and
Yeah.
advertisement. And
Right.
that was actually my first experience with anything that was truly AI driven. Just simple things that were, helping with CPC. Looking at, like just cost per click ads, what you should be leaning towards, what you should be leaning against. And you mentioned like so many people and so many campaigns. If your business and your marketing plan get expansive, and it will, if you're becoming really targeted, you got a whole lot of stuff to keep up with. And so some of the basic things that a lot of people have used that have AI in it are just doing things like raising bids up and down. And too many people get fascinated with the cost per click. It should be fascination with the CPA, the cost per acquisition. Am I wrong with that statement or correct?
You're absolutely correct. The most sophisticated marketers, don't really focus on cost per click, because that's just kind of a vanity metric, right? What they really want
Right.
to focus on is what's it going to cost to get the right quality of user in, and that's where the cost per acquisition comes in, and that's where where AI is able to work is ultimately, because it knows it's able to score all these different prospects. It will be willing to pay more for a certain user if it knows that user has a high propensity to recoup more money out of them on the long term versus another user. But and imagine doing this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's just basically just number crunching and identifying, let's go for this one, let's go for that one. And then and doing it across all these different ad platforms, because ultimately all of these ad platforms are like ad exchanges where it's all based on supply and demand. So even if you got the great customer that you want to target, let's say on Facebook, but there's so much competition at that given time where it's really expensive, the machine will just pivot and go to another exchange and see, hey, can I find that type of user somewhere else at a lower price? And that's the big difference when you end up sort of building or leveraging an AI system that's more personalized to you, because the algorithm then is working for your business versus what most people are doing now is, there is AI that's already available in a lot of these systems like with Google and Facebook and all these ad partners, but the AI there is really built for you to spend more money with them, because they have no
With them, right?
with them.
Yeah.
It's not really
Yeah.
based on getting you.
I'm not a big fan of those built-in things, because dude, Google does awesome shit, but the thing is they want you to spend money at Google. I had this conversation earlier today,
Yeah.
because we were talking about some of the things like, and a lot of this when it comes to advertising, especially paid advertisement, in my opinion, is built up to make you fail a little bit in the beginning, so then you feel like you're making progress and you keep spending money. There's a reason that Google hides negative keywords. It's not largely intuitive to add those the same way as it is to add a regular one. And then, they've got brilliant AI for cost per click stuff. But the thing is it's all about Google. Now, we recently had a guest that was a marketing specialist, and he said something I thought was awesome. You made me think of this when it came to the multi-platform approach. So they had been doing Google ads for a specific product, and they weren't getting a very high, like their CPA was really high. And they had been using a tool that figured out that Bing.com. Like, when's the last time you heard Bing, Lomit? Like, maybe not, probably not today. But the thing is they were advertising to an older demographic. Now, my dad still has an AOL email.
Yeah.
Okay. Which means he's in AOL. and he's in his late 70s. So like that's, people got conditioned to that. And it was a fair assumption that most of the people in some of these platforms were in a better age demographic. Like it would have definitely not had them advertising in Snapchat or TikTok.
Yeah.
But that's important stuff to look at, because as a business owner or a founder that's trying to grow your revenue, trying to grow your users, you shouldn't just be concerned with where they're coming from. Well, I mean, you want to be concerned with it. You want to know, but if you're paying for ads, you want them to come in the most efficient, cost-effective manner, and you want them to maximize it. Now, if you can prove this theory, and we'll go back to the VC part of this, this is clear, because the AI and the computation and all this quantitative data and blah, 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 blah. When you can show that to someone, you can say, hey, look, so my business has done well. For every dollar I spend, and this proves this, we get back 2.25. So we're getting this huge return. And the thing is we've proven that it can be scalable. So if you want to put $2 million into this company, and in 3 months, we are going to have $4.5 million of revenue or whatever. Now, am I correct that is what's getting VCs turned on? Like they're seeing the true quantitative nature and they're like, okay, I believe this, rather than my pitch deck just saying that it's so.
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit it right on the nail with that, because the big difference between giving somebody kind of a pitch deck is that, that's
founder error,
right? There's a lot of founder error versus giving them like, the real proof is really if you use real customer data and show them that, hey, I spent $1 and I was able to get like $2, $3, $4 back. But not only that, now based on the users that we're targeting, this machine is projecting the total scalability. Is that right now, I'm making out hypothetical numbers, but generally startups are probably, if they're lucky, they probably might spend $10, $50, or $100,000. But imagine now, with this much money and this much potential, if you invest in the business, I could be actually spending $2-3 million a month, or maybe even a day, based on what that range could be. And you have a pretty high statistical validation around, that 90 or 95% confidence interval that, hey, we could spend your money and get you this kind of return. That's where the eyes light up for VCs, because ultimately it's about having predictability on, if I'm putting this money in, what's the predictability that I'm going to get this kind of return back out.
And that's another thing, you talk about the scalability of growing a business and growing it quickly. A lot of people, and I'm going to go back to that founder error issue. So as founders, we're ultimately optimistic. We just kind of think that we can scale things and whatever. But a lot of times with advertising, the problem is people run this test, and they'll like spend $50 to $100 a day for about a month. And they're like, look, I get 3 to 1. Well, the problem is, and this is where AI can help you determine that, is it's probably not just about adding another zero onto your daily spend, meaning like the difference in the CPC, the cost per click, and the cost per acquisition between spending $100 a day and $1,000 a day can be remarkably different. Like a lot of these things kind of hit a summit and then honestly get to the point, they will get to the point of diminishing returns. So is that a big part of like using AI to determine the scalability? Because I'd like to think that the AI will say, hey, look, you're going to maybe cap out on this piece, but there's 50 other options that you probably didn't mention that you might want to pursue that appear to get the job done too.
Yeah, and that's a key thing, because every channel, wherever you end up spending, is going to have some kind of rate of diminished returns where you start hitting a certain cap, and unlike there's founder error, there's human error too, with the way people are mostly doing this, is that they'll keep spending, they won't even know till they hit it, and when they hit it, then it's like, where do we go next? But what AI is able to do is it will get you to that level, or with a high degree of confidence that, hey, this is how much you can spend on Facebook in Google. But more than that, it will identify, hey, these are all these other places that we can go and find these types of users that you want to find, and the potential there is whatever, another 50,000 here, another 20,000 here, but ultimately it identifies not only the the big partners, but also the long tail, which is where a lot of the scale comes from too. Which, for the most part, that's where a lot of the human error happens too, when you're just testing the long scale beyond the obvious partners.
Well, yeah, I consider myself to be a long tail marketer. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that term, there's a really easy comparison. So if you look at the number of downloads that Apple gets through their music app, and you consider this a graph. So on the left side, you've got Taylor Swift, who just had her 7th #1 album. That's way up there on the graph. You get Jay-Z and Luke Bryan and these other people, and now the graph's going a little downhill. And then eventually it gets down to the number of things that are downloaded one time per day. And that is a long tail on that graph that goes on and on and on. Now, I don't know if this is still the case, but several years ago, and I wrote about this in my book, $1 Million Bedroom, at one point, all of those ones added up, ended up being a bigger number than everything 2 and above. So the long tail is where the least competition exists. And a good example, and I've made a living with this in blogs, which are my favorite approach for long tail marketing. That's the low hanging fruit, man. You don't have to climb a tree. You don't have to get to the top. The apples are right there on the ground. You walk around and pick those up. And a good example is like, okay, if you have, so let's say you have, they don't even talk tech. You have a fashion brand and you make blue jeans. You're not going to rank for the term blue jeans. I'm sorry. You're not like JC Penney or God knows anyone else that's been making blue jeans since the internet came out, or is who you're going to have to climb over. So instead, a long tail approach might be chasing the custom blue jeans for teen girls. Okay, that is a long tail approach rather than going after blue jeans. Now, blue jeans is the much more expensive keyword than what I just mentioned. Now, the thing is with a long tail approach, you got to throw a lot of lines out. I want you to look at yourself as a fisherman. You throw more nets, more lines, everything. You just looking for one click, but you put it out on 10,000 different ways. So that one click that you get a day, which is also probably really affordable because it's low hanging fruit, that begins to swell up into a massive marketing campaign. Now, that's a situation where I could see in my own experience, if I had some kind of AI that was suggesting where I could chase that long tail, because it is very much like, you want to talk about gut feeling. Like, I literally sit there and come up with blog article topics, and that is the least scientific process that I have. But like I said, with long tail, you're just kind of shooting out there. Now, you won't ever see big effects on your long tail campaign right away. It takes time. You get those things out there. You get them out there. You get them out there. You get them out there. All of a sudden, they start piling up. Like my often co-host Matt Watson, Stackify.com gets 1 million blog visits a month. That's free. That is organic traffic. Now it took 3.5 years for them to build that up. And now all of a sudden they get the best of both worlds. They get the long tail and they get the big keywords because they got a lot of people linking to them, a lot of different stuff. So sorry, I know that was a little bit of a tangent, but I love long tail marketing. And I think the long tail approach is really tailor made for early stage businesses. Go get the low hanging fruit before you try to take over the whole tree. So sorry, I had to go there.
That's good.
So we recently did an episode about some of the top reasons that startups fail, and the top reason is it's a bad product market fit. Can AI help me figure that out?
AI can help you figure it out. Because primarily product market fit is it's about whatever product service you come up with. You want to quickly try to identify, is someone willing to either invest time or money for that product or service, right? And so that's where AI, ultimately, you got to have some kind of hypothesis on who you feel your users are, but But until you actually go and find those real users, you won't really know. And that's where AI can really help you identify, in the least amount of time, what's the most cost effective way to get some of those users in to try and help validate whether you do have, actual product market fit, which I think, for the most part is really important, because otherwise you end up just chasing, trying to trust like Google or whatever, and you just kind of put money out there and kind of hope they'll find you those users. But there's a lot of waste that happens in that process too.
Well, that's back to, and that's the thing that you're trying to avoid here, people, is the waste, ad waste. It's it's, if you ever read any article on funnel tactics, like you trying to make your funnel not leak. Spending money on ineffective marketing or trying to figure that out as the perfect example of a leaky funnel. I mentioned the word negative keywords earlier. I personally, my opinion on paid marketing is that you win and lose on the negatives, and the negative. And if you're going to buy whether you're using AI or not, Google negative keywords and understand how they work, because that's how you're going to exclude yourself from certain things. I learned the hard way and the expensive way about negative keywords when we launched Gigabooks 7 years ago, because we were appointment software. That was our keyword. Well, the thing is we didn't exclude. So it was, online appointment software. And the thing is people were going to Google and they wanted to make an online appointment at the DMV. So it would say online appointment DMV. And then we couldn't figure out at first why all these people that didn't have business names or anything were signing up for Gigabook. And then we finally figured that out. But it was a couple grand later, maybe more. And really, in the end, learning a little bit about the negatives. Now, have you seen effective lean AI that helps me do things like know what to exclude and what to get out of an ad campaign?
Yeah, because it's constantly learning at the end, right? Like you mentioned, just taking your example, you started getting people coming in that were probably doing these appointments, but ultimately it wasn't the right appointments. AI will start, because it will start seeing all this data coming in from these different types of users or channels. Will be constantly sort of optimizing the algorithm and coming up with recommendations in terms of like who should it be excluding versus who should be targeting even more, because ultimately it's always focused on that outcome. And if it's not getting to that outcome, the other thing is that it's able to project out pretty well, right? It doesn't need to, like, for example, spend $1,000 or a couple of $1,000s to get enough data, because based on just getting enough of data, a couple of $100s worth of like data, it can project that pretty accurately. If it keeps seeing negative correlation to where you want it to go, then it ultimately just starts to automate and start adding exclusions. Instead of manually doing all of that, it's building that in, and it's adjusting and pivoting as needed. So yeah, there's a lot of things that happen in the background, which ultimately, to what you were saying, saves time and saves money in the long term.
Saving money is making money,
That's right.
people. If you can learn how to sell more and spend less at the same time, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to have a hard time going out of business, basically. Like, that's the way to do it. So once again, with me today, I've got Lomit Patel, who's the author of Lean AI. You can find more information about him by clicking the link in the show notes. Now, before we get into the Founders Freestyle, which is the way we end episodes of Startup Hustle, I do want to remind you that today's episode of Startup Hustle is sponsored by Fullscale.io. We help you build a software team quickly and affordably. Now, for the Founders Freestyle, Lomit, we went through a whole lot of stuff. We talked about AI-driven VC investment, growing a business, CPC. We even had a brief dissertation on what the long tail is. With the Founders Freestyle, we give our guests an opportunity to close out the episode. I'll let you go first. Is there anything that you would like to say related to the many, many things that we talked about here in this episode?
So what I would end by saying is that ultimately, your data is really your superpower for growth. And what it comes down to is data isn't valuable unless you can extract value out of it pretty quickly. And that's where AI really enables you to do that, because it will pretty much be able to process your data at such a fast velocity, and as long as you've clearly defined what outcome that you want that you're trying to optimize towards, it will be able to figure out helping you to get to that outcome as quickly as possible. So ultimately, you know, try try to really be data driven, and really leverage data to really enable you to really. Every running any startup is challenging enough, but if you take the approach of being data driven, it will at least give you better insights to get around the different obstacles that come your way.
I think that that's well stated. I'm going to parlay off that for a moment. So the word data, data science, AI, machine learning, all that stuff, it scares people because we don't understand it on many levels. Now, it was about a year ago when I got tired of feeling uninformed about data science. So I got a couple Audible books and I learned about data science. I was like, wow, this wasn't the fundamentals of this aren't truly as complex as I led myself to believe. And, as I move forward, we use terms like hypothesis. Look, hypotheses are meant to be wrong. Like, take a shot, make some assumptions, prove yourself right or wrong. You're going to feel a lot better about it when you find something that's right. Now, for those that are longtime listeners, you know that I often say I like to try 10 things because I'm hoping that one works. Technically, lean AI and what we talked about today can allow me to try 10,000 things hoping that X number works, but I can only do so many on my own. So I think we're really in this golden age of information and data. 5 years ago, if you were a founder and you weren't highly technically proficient and you came and asked me about machine learning or AI or any of that and how you could use it in your business, I'd tell you it's not for you. Now, this 5 years later in our current time frame, you get more access to more things that do more stuff than you ever have before. Like, so much of this can be cruise controlled and piloted, but you're never going to know if you don't find it, if you don't trust it at first. Get in there and do it on a very small scale. But remember that there's a lot of resource, effort, money, and everything behind getting this right. So and as the future, no one knows what the future holds, but one thing I will tell you is the future definitely holds advances for AI and machine learning, because that's where a lot of the money goes. So anyway, go buy Lomit's book, learn some stuff, and give it a shot. I'll see you next time.